Alright, here we go. Game 2, SpaceOddity vs. Clue. Immediately we found a rather large patch of both iron and a good source of carbon, so pretty much any colony should be available to either of these players based on that initial reveal. c1ue00ster hasn't found the carbon just yet. It looks like he may be trying to found immediately once again. He found scientific on a couple of the aluminum, just leaving one for himself. Everything else, however, is going to have to be separated from his base. A very risky play in 1v1. With pirate auctions being a definite possibility, especially seeing as he let them go so cheap last game. Neither player has yet revealed water or silicon, but apparently they have no interest in these things whatsoever, and they just want to go ahead and get founded. SpaceOddity gonna have that extra claim at HQ level 2. She's just gonna take the very nice high carbon tile, likely a low carbon tile afterward, and then perhaps an aluminum with some potential adjacency later. She might also just be kind of patient and look around the map as it's revealed to these players after they found it so fast. For example, we've got high aluminum up in the top right corner, two sources of high aluminum up there. c1ue00ster might be kicking himself a bit having seen that now, since he didn't bother. Neither of these games has he bothered to actually explore the map. He has just tried to get founded immediately. SpaceOddity is going to forego the high aluminum, however, and simply take two low aluminum mines a bit closer to her base. We'll have access to those resources much earlier. Also selling off a fair amount of iron, trying to buy up some carbon, looking to just push to that upgrade as soon as possible is SpaceOddity. Whereas c1ue00ster, he's having to wait on steel. He is shipping the steel in a bit early, trying to get to that upgrade fairly quickly. A very reasonable play for a scientific player in particular. There he goes. He's probably going to add on another steel mill, and then we'll start looking at these players fighting over where is the silicon in this game. Okay, not a lot of silicon. I think I've seen 6 silicon tiles so far. So that is a very big deal. c1ue00ster, though, he is going to go after this close water patch. Very reasonable for a scientific player. Likely going to be putting down, I can't tell yet. It looks like he's just sent out the claims. He hasn't actually selected buildings yet. Although I would hope for maybe a water pump and 2 reactors on these. Should be fairly reasonable. Good. This auction's getting pushed a lot higher this game. A lot more fighting over these. This is important for both players. You definitely can't let auctions go for super cheap. We're starting to push the limits on this geotherm in particular. But it is just an extra claim, even if it does kind of force you into using geotherm as your primary source of power. SpaceOddity, I don't see, it doesn't look like she has sent out any additional claims yet after hitting HQ level 2. So she's still maybe looking across the map and deciding exactly what would be best. I would highly encourage people to look at this silicon tile in particular being very valuable this game. There we go. SpaceOddity is going to go ahead and grab that up. c1ue00ster is headed into his reactors once again. Hopefully he'll have a bit better adjacency this game and be able to make better use of them. SpaceOddity also just going to take some high water up in the northwest corner. Very reasonable. Not too far away from the base, and obviously an excellent source of water, which c1ue00ster isn't collecting at all yet, so it should stay fairly strong for a while. SpaceOddity might also be... Ooh, actually 2 silicon tiles getting taken. That's a bit aggressive early. Kind of locks you into a very distinct path this game. What I'm kind of seeing is that SpaceOddity will want to do the hop from HQ level 3 to 4 based on glass, and then 4 to 5 based on food, quite likely. This is what we'll be looking at here, with just kind of getting down enough power in between to hold on. Whereas c1ue00ster has a few more options, although he has actually opted to, instead of getting good adjacency bonuses or good water production right now, he is going to take a farm. So here are all the reasons this is flat out wrong. I'm going to go ahead and go over that this time. This tile, he could have picked any of these tiles for any of these buildings, correct? And could have picked any of 3 buildings. Electrolysis reactor, farm, water pump. A water pump on this tile, this high tile, would have given him 2 water a second. That's $70 a second off of this high tile. This farm, on the other hand, is giving half a food a second. So we're talking $33 a second, not counting in the power cost on this food tile, and then we're not counting in any shipping and all of that nonsense. But you get the basic idea that if this had been 2 reactors and a water pump, it would have doubled the income on this particular tile. Instead of being a farm, it would be a water pump. It would be fantastic. Also, if it were a reactor, it likely would have made more money, especially in the short term, as it would have provided double the current production for both oxygen and fuel. On top of that, there's a dust storm going on right now, which just completely wrecks everything. Dust storm and a solar flare at the same time creates a bit of an interesting scenario if we had any solar panels down, but we don't. So it's not that big a deal. SpaceOddity has hit level 3, is doing exactly as expected, going ahead and moving into those glass furnaces with that silicon production. Will likely push to farms, but c1ue00ster is kind of throwing a wrench into things by not actually picking one source of production. However, his food production should not overpower generally the food consumption going on, and food will continue to be a valuable resource throughout this game. SpaceOddity has got a wind turbine established during this dust storm, so that's going to be a very ridiculous amount of power for the time being. $145 a second in paid off debt right now. So that's very nice, just kind of slowing that debt gain at the moment with this dust storm, using the extra claims she received for just the low price of $6,000 for a little bit more power. c1ue00ster only now managing to get his geotherm online, and after that is when he will be looking to go ahead and expand, trying to catch up to HQ level 3, whereas SpaceOddity should already be well on her way to HQ level 4. Just needs a bit more carbon coming in, but she's done consuming carbon for the time being. Putting down these 2 wind turbines seriously slowed that down, but it's also seriously slowing debt, and so it is perhaps a fairly reasonable choice. But with these good amount of aluminum and glass coming in, I don't know. c1ue00ster has hit level 3. That's good. He's keeping up reasonably well. Ooh, he's actually repositioning a reactor, having added a reactor and then deleted a reactor. What is he planning to do with this tile? Is he wanting to put 3 reactors up here and then 2 farms here? I'm not entirely sure. But this is some very weird decisions coming out of c1ue00ster. Perhaps spending a bit more resources than he realizes, swapping his buildings around to try and get the ideal production, instead of just accepting any mistakes he's made previously. SpaceOddity has pushed to HQ level 4, actually deleting a glass furnace, both glass furnaces, as she saw a glass surplus coming in, and decided to go ahead and make that transition into strong food production. Now that she's deleted the glass because of this surplus, she's going to have 3 extra tiles to figure out what to do with. There is a shortage on chems, which could provide a nice opportunity potentially, but chems are still very expensive, not making any money at all because of fuel's ridiculous cost at the moment. So it's very difficult to know exactly what to do. Yes, c1ue00ster has moved into 3 electrolysis reactors and 2 farms for his production. Those will be providing decent amounts of money at this point, for sure. Can't be any question about that, but I worry that SpaceOddity, maybe her farms will be a little bit better. She's actually also moving into solar panels, which is a bit of an odd decision. It manages to use that silicon that she committed to quite heavily, and so perhaps kind of supports those silicon tiles, but it's not going to make a whole lot of money long-term, potentially. Also choosing to power surge c1ue00ster's steel rather than this nice patch of money-making water buildings is a bit of an odd decision. I can understand the basic principle behind it. We want to keep c1ue00ster down in levels. We don't want to let him expand very easily. We don't want to let him build buildings very easily. But he's already done all of those things for this level. And so perhaps hitting his money might be a bit better. Another 7,000 claim goes over to SpaceOddity. c1ue00ster really has to fight harder over those. He was willing to push to 16,000 for this initial geotherm, but suddenly he's scared of 7,000 for a far more valuable auction that would allow him to do any claim he wanted, rather than just sticking to this particular geotherm tile. It's a bit worrying for me, if I'm honest. Water is starting to get up there. SpaceOddity really might want to have used that extra claim for some additional water production. I'm not sure exactly where it went right now. She has mutinied away an electrolysis reactor. However, it looks like it did not have a ridiculous number of resources in it. It will get a decent steel going, but not as effective as one would hope for a mutiny on a scientific player, as it could have stolen a good 80 oxygen and fuel and then continued producing from there. Underground nuke goes down onto SpaceOddity's water. c1ue00ster has identified that water is a bit serious right now. SpaceOddity is relying on food to make money. If we can drive water up in price, then he can make all the money off of food and electrolysis for SpaceOddity to move around, whereas he can just stick on his basic production, not caring that water has gotten a little out of control. And even potentially supplying water in the future if he wishes. Now, another thing c1ue00ster has done is taken a lone glass furnace, once again showing he has no fear of not getting to abuse adjacency bonuses, even without the silicon cost. However, This glass furnace is only making $12 a second, and it is still very vulnerable to something like dynamite or a mutiny. So that's definitely a bit of a concern for c1ue00ster. Also a concern is SpaceOddity has hit level 5, has a hacker array. She hasn't decided what to do with it yet. And she does have 4 claims left over that she's going to have to make sure to use fairly soon. Plenty of carbon coming in, which is reasonably valuable. Carbon is the fairly obvious, simple, and straightforward hack right now. Power is kind of an option, but generally not recommended at any particular point. And she's really got to go ahead and use these 4 claims up with the $5,000 she's sitting on. I don't really know what she's waiting for. Maybe she's just looking around, trying to figure it all out. Transitioning, it looks like, out of these solar panels, realizing, power's not really that crazy anymore. Let's get out of these. Actually moving into chems. Could be a reasonable. 1 chem lab on its own just about breaks even. So with adjacency bonuses, this could be a fairly strong play, especially if it is backed up by the hacker array with a short on chemicals. She is also finally selected to go for additional water, realizing, man, $90 is kind of a high water price. That could be pretty useful to be collecting on. And there was also, it looks like, a power surge onto c1ue00ster's water-based production. So that's good. Alright, Chem Lab's coming out for both players. c1ue00ster once again choosing to just go for 1 building. Looks like he might have selected to go for an extra claim off of the black market. Very reasonable, but this 1 Chem Lab, unfortunately, is not going to be making him a lot of money. Converting 1 fuel into half of a Chem Lab and having to ship the fuel all the way over, it's going to be a bit pricey. But I think the real story right now, yeah, you can look at the chems, you can look at all the water stuff over here, and that's great. The reactors are doing just fine. But realistically, water's $100 a pop, and SpaceOddity has what? Let's check. Yeah, 6.5 water flowing in a second right now. Only consuming half of it. It's just, sorry, half of a water unit because she doesn't have any food down. She doesn't have any reactors down. That is a lot of cash into SpaceOddity's hands. And c1ue00ster is still an HQ level behind, having just now upgraded, trying to push into more chems, but not really expanding any of his water-based production because water is so expensive, and there are no more water tiles for him to easily grow into with where he chose to place it. This simple glass furnace still making small amounts of money. These steel mills getting frozen. The steel mills are fantastic income right now. With steel up to about $100 a pop, it's exactly the kind of thing he's looking for. The EMP just kind of slowing him down, but if anything is going to keep him in this game, it's going to be these reactors combined with these steel mills, making good chunks of money for the time being. Unfortunately, if he wants to expand again, he's going to need the steel to do that. And so it being a bit of a high price is not so much a benefit as it is a detriment. More Chem Labs coming down for SpaceOddity. We really need to see a Chem hack along with that, but instead it looks like what we're seeing out of SpaceOddity. I actually love this play. It's fantastic and amazing in every single way, shape, and form. Is we are seeing an iron shortage after SpaceOddity went and made the move into iron, which has just been rising in price all game because we have a scientific player and a scavenger player, and she found it right next to a good source of iron. Yeah, she used it to make food, and she used it to make glass, but there's still iron in there. So she's grabbed up 1,000 iron, which naturally had moved up to $100 a piece, went ahead and shorted it. She'll need to transition out of this fairly quickly after the short is over, because it does not take much to knock iron's price all the way down. However, for the time being, that's a ridiculous amount of money in her pocket. Absolutely love that play. Gonna be looking to do more things with this hacker array. Just needs to decide on the next target and go with it. Carbon, once again, still a fine option. Water, also actually an acceptable option. And it may be time to, as soon as possible, move out of these Chem Labs and these iron mines and on into something like food or fuel. Now, c1ue00ster started getting his stock bought up and has retaliated. We've got SpaceOddity with 3 stocks in c1ue00ster and c1ue00ster with 2 stocks in SpaceOddity. c1ue00ster's water production still going strong with his food and his reactors online, still making plenty of money. Once again, he hasn't needed to move those around, which has been a very nice benefit for him. He has also, interestingly enough, gone for a high water tile, trying to take advantage of those very, very high water prices, but I don't know if he got it in time to really get a whole lot going with it, especially because there are no adjacency bonuses for that, and so it's really not a lot of water per second coming in for him. SpaceOddity does a massive iron sell, knocks the price down to $2, really needs to get out of these metal mines. It was a nice idea for a play, but it's over, and it's time to move on. Especially maybe get into some steel mills, maybe get back into farms or reactors would all be excellent plays. She's going for the stock buys, and she has managed to purchase up a very large amount of stock, but I don't think she can quite get the game over based on this production if c1ue00ster goes ahead and defends himself, which realistically he should, but instead he's getting aggressive. So we're just going to have to see how this plays out with these two players. But once again, we can see SpaceOddity not really pulling in cash at the moment and needs to go ahead and make that transition, get out of these chem labs, which would be costing ridiculous amounts of money as they're online. We can see that as she's selling things off, her chem labs keep drinking up all of her money in fuel cost, and that increases c1ue00ster's income quite effectively based on his reactors. And so she is going to need to scrap these, move on to something else very quickly before she keeps trying to sell off resources to buy up something else. So she's going to stall out, and c1ue00ster is just going to keep sitting here on his effective production he has never had to move because he is a scientific player. Carbon shortage is coming on in for SpaceOddity. Interestingly enough, c1ue00ster has 200 carbon stored up for this, which I have no idea why. Looks like he put down a carbon quarry instead of his chem labs, which were costing him massive amounts of money. And so he's got just a little carbon stored up from that. And he might be able to take some advantage off this shortage. The shortage doesn't move the price around all that much. And he had quite a lot saved up. Actually, over halfway to buying SpaceOddity now. But instead of going for the kill immediately, he upgrades. That should let SpaceOddity relax just a little bit as it gives her time to move around. But once again, these chem labs are killer. These chem labs absolutely need to be deleted and moved into farms, because every single time SpaceOddity gets a hold of just a little money, it immediately goes down the drain with these chem labs. Teleportation is kind of a big deal here. It gives c1ue00ster a nice big leap in income immediately if he grabs up teleportation, immediately getting a hold of 61 food and something along the lines of 60 oxygen and 40 fuel. All instantaneously, but instead SpaceOddity is going to be the one to grab it. So c1ue00ster doesn't get a hold of teleportation as a scientific player. That is definitely questionable. Also questionable is this lone electronics factory. We really need to see more adjacency bonuses coming out of c1ue00ster here. There we go. It's got some friends now. The electronics production should actually be fairly strong once he's got all of those adjacency bonuses going. It's going to be about $215-ish a second, all told, I believe, for those electronics factories. And we've actually seen SpaceOddity make the exact same move, trying to head into electronics factories. There we go. SpaceOddity has identified the drain through which all the money is pouring, but it might be too little too late. c1ue00ster has managed to get up the same amount of stock as SpaceOddity, and on top of that, SpaceOddity's stock price is a good $6 below c1ue00ster because she neglected power for so long this game, only having enough power to barely kind of hold on. c1ue00ster has the 100%. Is he going to realize and go for the kill? The red button is going ahead and getting there, and the chem labs take down SpaceOddity. c1ue00ster is going to take game number 2, and we have a game number 3 for this series. Ooh. All right, guys. That'll show you. Watch your chem labs. Chems are the weakest resource in the game, in my opinion. And that's why. Look at how fast those chem labs killed that game. It was all the chem labs. If it wasn't for the chem labs, that game is over. But the chem labs got left on with auto supply on. They just drank up every last bit of cash SpaceOddity was trying to make. SpaceOddity tried to make the push to end the game, but she could never build up a stockpile to actually get stock purchased because the chem labs were just sitting there going, feed me the whole time. If we hadn't seen those chem labs allowed to continue on drinking up all of this $66,000 of fuel, I think we would have had a very different end to this series. But instead, we're going to go on to game 3. Very interesting indeed. Decent black market use by SpaceOddity. 3 power surges, 1 EMP, 1 mutiny, 1 goon squad. All very reasonable. c1ue00ster also with 6 black market purchases, however. 2 underground nukes coming out. Mostly onto SpaceOddity's water, if I remember correctly. 2 new claims, also good use. 1 EMP and 1 dynamite. Very, very reasonable decisions most of the time. This dynamite was a little awkward at the end. But by that point, it didn't really matter, did it? Very interesting little game.